We have seated here in the retreat center at Camp Omega 4 of the gentlemen whose spirit-led passion and determination resulted in a Christian ministry here at camp that is coming up on celebrating 50 years in the ministry. To the left is Pastor Martin Krause. Seated next to him is Pastor Victor Roth. Next to him is Pastor Eugene Caulfield. And next to Eugene is Charlie Bourne. And the gentleman to the far right is Mr. Gordy Kosfeld. He is the news and sports director at KDHL radio station in Faribault. Gordy is a longtime supporter, even a participant here at camp in his younger years.
I first came here in the early 70s, came to camp at Camp Omega and felt the Spirit for the first time here, and it has a special place in my heart. And just wondered if you could take us down memory lane back to the first time you saw this site.
Well, the first permanent construction on Camp Omega was done by my dad. At the point, there is a stone altar that's still used for devotions. Seats back there. It was his idea. All the material by boat across the lake. And it took a while, but he was satisfied. It's good. That was the first permanent building on Camp Omega.
I kind of have to disagree with him.
Okay.
The first 2 buildings on this property were 2 outhouses.
But Gene was the one who planted the seed of a camp. It was from him, his experience in New Mexico. Camp works well. And I didn't know what he meant by camp. So we had to brief me on that. It sounded like a good idea. One thing led to another. But really, Gene was the start of it.
I've always believed that a pastor should be able to meet with his young people away from the hubbub of society or civilization, let's say, where there's no interference, where he can be alone with them, and where there can be some spiritual value transmitted. When you're competing with refreshment stands and other campers and everything like this, you can't accomplish a whole lot. You can take them to places in the United States, Capitol and other places. There's nothing really spiritual about that. Camping for me was a time that was to be special with my young people, in which I could help them on their way to heaven. Go over God's Word and point out different pitfalls that they might run into, and others, try to prepare them especially in the way for life, and establish a closer relationship with them.
I'll say we talked about things, my classmates and I, when we came out here, that we would have never talked about in church. Much more open.
Now, my beginning with Camp Omega would have been with Pastor Roth, and I was in the Walther League at that time, and so it was fair game that we both lived fairly close to this area, and met with Joe Herring, who was the original owner of this as farmland, and got our start by saying, yes, the Minnesota South District needs a camp. I think that Pastor Roth probably had been talking to Mr. Herring for a number of times, and Mr. Herring was open to selling this land, and obviously just an ideal spot, even though it was really only farmland and woods and wetlands at that time. So we had the opportunity to meet with him and really get the camp started as far as officially having this spot as being the camp. Our former camp, where most of us would have gone, would have been, I think East Battle Lake, Minnesota, which is way up north.
Camp Henning.
So, Camp Henning.
Camp Henning.
We just needed a spot here in Minnesota South District.
And what always made me want to carry it on was the joy that you have in strengthening your own people. I finally wrote courses for that, and or wrote materials that I would use at the camp. And in Wisconsin, I camped with my young people for 30 years. So it was a very big part of our lives. When you get in a camp where you're all by yourself, you're cut off, you're in a unit now. And the spiritual leaders are there, and if they're shepherds, they're not there to entertain the kids, they're not there to amuse them. They can have fun with them, but they're there to give them something they won't get any other place, in any other way, any other setting. And when you have a campfire session, you talk around the campfire, sing around the campfire, you can have communion by Coleman lantern. These kind of things, they make an impact on the kids. And we've had many through the years thank us for the experiences that we've had. It's one of the most valuable things the church can do, because it gives you a chance to be with them and strengthen them, and they help you too, because they can bring their troubles to you and they'll talk to you, and you can do a lot for them.
So it strengthened your faith too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And as one of the young people going to them, to the camps at that time, it's not a place where you're being preached to. It's a commonality of everyone being there, and even the counselors many times would be older than the campers, but still very young. They understood. To get around a campfire and just sing and talk was much different than either being in a classroom setting or being in a church service.
The real background in this is that they may deepen their love for Jesus Christ, their Lord and their Savior. If we haven't had that, we've lost our purpose, see? And in bringing them to out there in the setting, in God's outdoors, they're away from some of the worldly things that are going around them. And they find that then in being led back into the Word, that's where they begin to grow. That's where they begin to blossom out then as individuals. And unless you've brought that Jesus Christ to them out there, you've missed the point with regard to it. The purposes that we set up for Camp Omega, our symbol, for instance, that's the heart and the center. That's the heart and the center of our whole camping program. You've got to keep in mind there were other people that were involved. And one day I took a lady, Carol Burtis, because I was going to show her the camp. She was very interested in it. So we had to go up there by the pump and go out around, and then come back down underneath and go around the lake. And got down to the bottom of the hill, there was a mud place. We got stuck. And I had to walk back into town to get a wrecker to come out there. In the meantime, she sat there in the car because she couldn't get around, walk. She had a bad leg. And she sat out there, I was thinking about things. And I thought of that Porsche. She said, Omega. Omega. That's the name we got.
What I want to know is who was driving.
I was driving. That's the problem.
Yes, my uncle farmed this land. So my cousin John and we fished off the peninsula. Bullheads, sunfish, big sunfish if we were lucky. And it was a lot of fun and memories. So I'm familiar with this area from way back, never dreaming that someday the church would have a camp here. Never dreamed that. Our first idea of a camp here at Camp Omega was a peninsula, those two hills. Mm-hmm. The girls' village here and a boys' village there, and a valley dividing them. Well, then the landscape architect says, let that be primitive. Don't touch that. You know, that's precious. Put them someplace else. That was a good idea. Good advice. That the peninsula is primitive, except for that permanent building up in that point, that altar.
Was it tough for you to see this transform from the farmland you once worked?
Oh, it's awesome. It's awesome. Dreams can become reality, and they do quite often. Dreams become reality.
And really, one of the things that we have to be reminded of is in order to be that reality, I would say there were two people really instrumental in doing that. And one, of course, is Pastor Roth, but the other would be Joe Herring, who owned the property and no doubt was given the idea that this would be a great place for a camp. Nevertheless, his faith and devotion to young people also had to be there and saying, boy, if I can make this happen, I'm going to be a part of it. Part of that was in the price that we had to pay for this land. And I think the first 38 acres, whoever bought it, Missouri Synod, paid something like $395 an acre. And even at that time, it was a very nice place to build a house out on the point, and it would have been worth a lot more than $395 an acre. Even the second 38 acres, which was, I think, primarily farmland, but maybe not as good as if you were to go to Martin County or some of the other counties in Minnesota. Nevertheless, we bought that for, I believe, less than $200 an acre. That wasn't a buy-sell, that was a gift. And we really need to remember Joe Herring as being the person that started that gift.
I would say, let's don't just remember Joe, but let's also remember Mrs. Herring.
Well, sure.
Mrs. Herring, I think, had more of a heart for things. Now, they wanted to build a home. I know this because they were members of mine in Waterville. They wanted to build a home down in the valley. And by the way, there's a lot of history of that place in there too, with regard to things. But she, I'm sure, had a lot of influence on Joe, because Joe, you know Joe, what kind of an individual he was, eh? And she, I'm sure, had a lot of it, because then they built a little home down at the bottom here of the hill. That's where they built a home, see. But their heart was in the other, and moved by the grace of God in Christ Jesus, these people then almost donated that land.
I think our idea was always what a camp should be, that it was to be a spiritual time to strengthen the young people for life.
Well, there's no better place. I always call it God's church. When you get outdoors, it's God's church.
I felt that the young people needed it. And that was our primary purpose at that time. Not the whole church, but the young people. The young people. Let's keep them with the church some way, see? That was what we should be doing.
The usual program for a week of young people, but Thursday night would be talent night. Each cabin was expected to contribute something to the program night, and then when it was over, they just had fun by themselves. One time, the fun was water. A little bit of water in the glass filled in, and that escalated. I and my brother was helping me there. We were off to the side watching that escalation. Full glasses of water, you know, right on, and all this floor of the dining hall was concrete. We could mop that up. That's no problem. No problem at all. And one of the boys came to me with a pitcher of water. We locked eyes, and he had a big grin on his face. And I looked at him, I'm not playing. I made a mistake. I approached him. I should have stayed where I was. I got it right there. So he laughed. He was laughing so hard he couldn't do much. I picked him up off the floor, fireman's carry outside, and took him down the hill. I was gonna go all the way to the lake with him, but he got a little bit heavy there. But he was laughing all the time, he couldn't stand.
I think there's one thing that's so easy to miss when you're working with young people and all. You know, we talk about them not taking things seriously and getting involved in things, but I never will forget one of the girls that came up to me at one of the retreats we had, and she looked at me and she says, "Is life really worth living?" From a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about that and similar things through the years. And the kids are very concerned about their lives and about their eternal future. If they've had any kind of Christian background, it's not something they ignore, but there's so many, things that compete with that. Satan has a way of trying to make sure that that's a small part of their thinking or a lesser part than it should be. And the camping program gives you a chance to shove him to the background and let their faith just open up. And let them open up, you can open up, and it can be beautiful to see what happens.
I think this was evident when the Walther League picked it up for us. That we talked about this, and we then went to the Walther League, and they said, yes, we're going to back you, we're going to go with it, and gave us $1,000 to get started.
Which was a lot of money back then.
Which was a lot of money, but the thing was this, we needed it so that we could have a contract with the Herrings to be able to get the property. And that started us then in getting the property, because we had a contract for deed, well, I don't know how many years, 15 years or something like that, that the Herrings then took a contract for deed.
The district lawyer advised us, you better become incorporated so you can legally
Right.
make agreements like this and legally take hold of some land. We hadn't even thought of becoming incorporated, so it was Minnesota South Camp Association Incorporated.
And that was with the Walther League.
And to back up just a little bit further again, when Pastor Roth and I met with Joe Herring to basically outline the property, one of the things that we did, Joe, I think, had planned on using some of the land that was in the original 38 acres as not necessary for the camp. But there was a short span up here that would make a very uneven field if he kept that. And so we suggested that perhaps it should be 38 acres rather than maybe it would have been 25 acres or something. And again, he was agreeable to that. Once we did have that agreement verbally, I know Pastor Roth and I went to Waterville and had a purchase agreement drawn up that date because we didn't want to lose that possibility of the Herrings changing their mind, because we felt we had a gold mine as a possible campsite. And there's always the idea that, well, maybe we should sell this as lots, or there would be a better opportunity
For fundraising.
for making
When we first started looking with Joe, I was under the impression, I don't know whether you were or not, but Joe's farm is on the other side of the lake. They don't have a home up here. They didn't have that up here. Joe's farm was on the other side of the lake, and I was thinking when we talked with Joe that was going to be on the other side of the lake. And then Joe came along, and he came out with us one day, and he stood up there, where the well is, and he held out his arms. Remember that? And he says, how about this?
yeah.
How about this? And we went back and said yes.
And
We went back and
basically
said yes.
well, maybe a little bit more
Yeah,
rather than
yeah.
a little less. And that was the beginning of a larger camp, room for more camp.
And then later on, Joe came back and he said, you know, this other area that I have over here is pasture land. He says, I can't use it. How would the camp like to buy it? And
That
we-
was $184 an acre.
I don't know, we jumped at the
Yes.
cake. We jumped at it right away. Yeah, we jumped at it right
They
away.
The
may
Lord
not have
had
had
the
the money.
seeds.
but
Oh,
we
the
jumped.
Lord had his hand in everything. He had his
Yes.
hand in everything.
Certainly did.
I like to put it that the Lord smiled on Camp Omega from the first square,
Yeah.
the word go. And he was smiling on Camp Omega. Everything just fell in place.
Well, there had to be some trying times and all this.
Oh,
You
we didn't have
recall a time or two when you thought, gee, why do we do this? Or,
We didn't have any problems. Just problems.
We had some issues. We never had a problem.
That's right. That's
And
right.
those issues became opportunities.
Yeah, and especially when somebody would come up with the idea, we need a 500-seat chapel out here. That was one of the first things that was said to me.
500 seat
We
camp.
should have a place, a 500-seat chapel out here, see? And of course, well, other plans, we had to go to other plans.
And we did have a 500-seat chapel, just not a building.
Yeah, that's about right.
This is the first place I think I realized that the Spirit, that Jesus was important in everyday life as opposed to just going somewhere on Sundays to worship Him.
See,
You know what I'm
that-
saying?
That's the thing you can get out of camping
Yes.
with them.
Absolutely.
That you cannot hardly get out of them in a church building.
Because all these, you mentioned the fun activities and the camping and everything, but it was all, as you mentioned, word-based,
Word-based.
scripture-based.
But we had our problems. Let's not kid ourselves. There were those problems.
You don't think the devil's going to let you build any?
No, I know he wasn't. He worked. He worked hard. He worked hard on things. And he worked hard on people to try and get us to change our minds with regard to things, see? But we had two 24 by 48 tents. And we used those for the dedication with Pastor Leesky, our president, at that time, having the sermon for that day. And I helped dedicate it then. We had a big crowd out here on it. But then we used that one tent to house the dining hall, so to speak. One cabin was used for the cooking. They had to come through the cabin to get their food, carry it over into the tent area that we had there, and that's where they would eat that day. And that's where we had our meetings many times. We would get started. But the wind sometimes, well, these past weeks, you know how the wind was. They blew down, and you can imagine a 24 by 48 tent, how we had to get up there. And it had to be up before they could go any place or do anything.
Ringling Brothers were not,
No.
as far as tent building.
Yeah. And that's why we poured the concrete slab to get that place going. And if anybody remembers the canteen inside there, we had it fenced off, had a fence around it, so the kids wouldn't get into the candy without being paid, without us paying for it. So,
Temptation's got to take.
yeah, temptation. We had that.
So, Pastor Krause, as you see Camp Omega today, what are your thoughts?
How awesome. Dreams become reality beyond what we were dreaming. Yeah. And definitely had the Lord's hand blessing in that. I want to mention
Well,
about the utility building, Fairmont building. My dad was behind that. He knew the camp would have to have a utility building in order to keep functioning. And no one was talking about it, so he decided he's going to get the money together from congregations around Fairmont, and he would be the supervisor. Actually, he put in a lot of hours himself to build that thing. I helped him. I laid the block for the chimney. That was my contribution to it.
That's why it's crooked.
But it's still standing.
Still standing.
Because the lake got green.
Oh, yeah, well, that's
See-
southern Minnesota
See,
Lakes.
so the thing is this, well, yeah, but how can the kids go swimming? So they were right away, they wanted a swimming pool,
Oh, man.
see?
It took a lot of talking.
Well, not only that, but,
I don't think the pool was here when I was here.
no,
'Cause we were in the,
yeah. Well, you had green stuff once in a while, yeah.
What about the main buildings, which you talked about the worship center, outdoor worship center, but which was the main facility? Beta was the first building built? Or I thought it was Gamma, that the kitchen was in Gamma.
Now, wait a minute, now, you got, because you've named them differently from what we started out, I believe.
Okay,
Starting down at the bottom is what?
Zeta,
Zeta, then
Epsilon,
Epsilon, and
Delta,
Delta,
Gamma,
Gamma.
Beta, and then Alpha. Alpha's right up here by the parking lot.
Alpha is the long building.
Yes.
That's where the tent was over the concrete floor there. But we had a lot of camping that went on way over on the other side of the ball field. That's where we started out camping, right? Where we had our 2 outhouses. Then we had to build 2 outhouses close to the cabins because we didn't have water or running or anything like that, you know. But we did have cooking facility.
They call it primitive camping.
Yeah.
Primitive camping is what it was.
Yeah.
Right.
Then how about this building?
This one here, that came later on. The dining hall was built first. Then this was built.
So this was probably the last building.
No, your
Oh, the house was the last
house
building,
was the
right?
last building, as far as I know.
Now, you mentioned the worship center out there, the retaining wall. That was my brother's idea, David. He had that idea and carried it through and laid plans and all that. Saw to it that there were field stone all in. Some of that stone, quite a bit of it, came from a old barn foundation that my grandfather was a mason for, stone mason. August Krause, and I had 2 sons and son-in-law with the pickup truck hauled those stones over here so the masons could use them. And some of them were pretty big. They had to use rope, block and tackle to get them from there onto the truck. But they did it.
How about this logo tree that's the logo here that's in the fireplace? Do you know any of that history?
That was my dad's idea.
Okay.
He had a outfit in New Ulm to do the work, and he died before it was finished. And it was a work in progress, just hanging there in progress. So I finished it up.
And we have it then as the tree of life. Yeah, it fits in there. We have in like there's our purpose, the logo itself, how it incorporates then the purpose of our camp.
So you said your dad created the logo, drew up or where did the logo design come from?
The logo itself had been established. He just had it enlarged, and the Artstone Company in New Ulm took it from there.
Because at that time we had quite a group from Rochester that was involved. And that's why Pastor Gertner's son, who had died in the service, that was named then for this area out here, campgrounds.
Corporal Gettner Memorial Campground out there.
The memorial campgrounds, right.
you know what I thought was a neat idea? I read about the coloring books that you guys had.
Yeah, there were
Great marketing tool for this.
40,000 of them that we distributed because we wanted to get the name to the kids.
Right.
See, that's what we thought of,
It's
see?
a great idea.
Yeah. And we had another brochure. I don't want to see if I haven't found one that I think is so important that gives the people information as to what the camp was going to be built like.
I don't remember the names, but I do remember that we had an artist paint a picture of Jesus, and then with kids.
Some modern kids on there.
The modern painting.
Howard Sandine.
Okay.
Howard Sandine was his name.
Okay, then we took that to
Yeah.
a publishing place up in the cities, and just as a mechanical kind of thing, watched how they put that together to give us a really nice color picture from that. Doing the dot on dot and making sure that it was done just right. And I'm not sure how many pictures we ended up having.
I don't know, we gave them to the congregations, and they were to sell them for $2.89, I think.
Yeah.
Something like that, to raise money for the camp.
But it was a picture that every once in a while you still see someone have that picture in a frame, maybe in a bedroom or a hallway or something. And there were a lot of those. And that was a good promotion for the camp.
Oh, yeah.
Great idea.
Oh, we had we had a lot of promotion to make because
Right.
we had opposition to the camp too.
Yeah, the Camp Emmaus was the camp for the district, and before Camp Omega came on the scene, Camp Emmaus.
The Eifert brothers were big in that, and they had a good camp.
Oh, it was excellent.
They had a very good camp, and so we were always we were really working against it in a sense, because we wanted to get them to come into this area to go out.
You know, the times that we were holding youth groups at Stony Point, I remember one group, well, we were talking, how come we can't have a camp of our own?
Mm-hmm.
This small, dinky little church body has this wonderful place. How come we can't have one of our own? Just a good thought. Take it to the district Walthley convention. Why can't we? And then the exploration committee was appointed. We pastors were on that, weren't we?
Well, we started it really, and went to the Walther League. Yeah. That's what it was. We started and went to the Walther League, and then the Walther League began to take a hold of it at that time. Well, you start out when we had groups maybe of 10 or 12 people. I wanted to bring in thought of Ambassadors for Christ. How many remember them? Pastor Darko would bring his group out, but 10 or 12 people, you know, and that's the first year. What did we have out there? Quite a few groups, but maybe 400 to 500 people came out to the camp. Not all camped, but how many campers do we have now today?
1,500 in the summer.
1,500 in the summer, and all the groups in the wintertime.
About 6,000 a year.
6,000 a year.
Oh, my.
See?
I remember back in the formative era of Camp Omega, should it be seasonal, just summer,
Right.
or year-round? And unfortunately, the decision was year-round. We build the cabins so they can be used in the wintertime. And they're always used, aren't they?
That's
Yeah,
because we
I
have 10
remember
months of
that,
winter.
a week.
That was unique
That's
for the
because
time,
we have
wasn't it?
10 months of winter.
Wasn't that concept unique for the time?
Oh yes, because all other camps around
Were
were summer camps. We knew that.
With a group was the winter camp, and it got cold, 42 below zero. That was enough to turn the propane into liquid. It wouldn't flow through the pipes. One after another, the fire went out in those cabins up in the dining hall. You see, no more fumes, no more fumes. The kids were coming up to the dining hall, and the dining hall had its own, I think, reservoir of propane, and that was okay. But the guy at the gas company said, the thing to do is start a fire under that big tank. You won't get it to explode. You can't, but you can get it to flow. And that was it. That was funny, though. Big fire underneath it's going to go boom.
So was Camp Omega used year-round from the beginnings then?
Yeah, it's planned for Europe.
No. Oh no.
Was it planned for that?
Huh?
It was planned?
It was planned for it, but we didn't use it year round because the first couple of summers we didn't have water and things out here. We didn't have the road to get out here. It would have been hard for the people to really camp during the winter. You see. Well, you know, finally we did get enough money together to put a frame around on that spot that was so important there to us. You know, it's what building is it now today?
Beta.
I can't. The naming was different. So it's built. It's done.
The beginning and the end.
Also look at the Omega is the last letter of the Greek alphabet,
Right.
the last word, and Camp Omega is the last word on camping.